Heaven is for real, a little boy's astounding story of his trip to heaven and back. You've been listening with rapt attention, I know, these last few days. Todd Burpo is both the author and the father of this little guy who, at age 3 and 10 months, had this remarkable experience. He mentioned in the clip previously, Armageddon. Now, I was shocked when I heard this. Now, he's 12 on that clip, but still, how did he know the word Armageddon? I mean,
well, he didn't.
Where did he come up with that?
Yeah, he didn't use that word when he was sharing it with me, but he was about 6 at the time. And I think, many times when your reader's trying to connect with what he's describing, sometimes, a lot of people say, well, he didn't use the word Trinity. No, he didn't. That was my word, but we knew what he was trying to explain. But he said, Dad, there's going to be a war, and this world is going to be destroyed. I saw Jesus, the angels, and the good people fight Satan, the monsters, and the bad people.
Yeah, I love this term monsters. It brought a new reality because of a recent tragedy in our family. I now have 3 little people living with me. And the 2-year-old keeps talking about how he and I are going to fight the bad guys, Dad, the monsters, the monsters. Here's a little almost 4-year-old talking about the monsters.
You see, here's another thing about the theology professors I've had to change because of my son. They say, well, Revelations is allegory. It doesn't really mean monsters.
Apocalyptic literature, yeah.
No, here's a 4-year-old that knows what a jet is, knows what a helicopter is, and he goes, oh no, Dad, those are monsters. And it kind of really changes some of my own perspective.
Yeah, because John's vision in Revelation includes some monstrosities.
Exactly.
Multi-eyes, multi-horns, multi-everything.
Well, later on, we don't have this in the book, but he talks about Satan. He finally starts opening up, and he says, Dad, why do I remember 7 heads and 10 crowns? That doesn't make sense. What do you say? Well, son, I don't know what it is you saw, but you and John saw the same thing.
Did he describe any personal relationships? Now, he talks about Pop.
Yes.
And maybe we should get into this. He talks about his sister. Now, he has a sister
Yes.
here on Earth. You hadn't told him that your wife had miscarried.
No.
He meets a sister who doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, we'd had a miscarriage between Cassie and Colton. One of the most, probably before Colton's experience, we would have probably told you, one of our most painful things to live through until that happened. It was night before Father's Day. We were going to announce to our church family we're expecting again. And on Father's Day, that was the plan. And the night before, Sonia miscarries the little one. She was only 2 months along, so we didn't know if it was a boy. We didn't know if it was a girl. But my son's, I went to church, my wife stayed home with my daughter, and like she describes, I was just laying there in the fetal position crying. I was asking, did I do something wrong? Did I eat something wrong? But then she conceived Colton several months later, and then we tried to move on to being parents. And you don't explain to 3-year-olds, at least I didn't, hey, mommies can lose babies in their tummies without scaring them. And we had never had that discussion with Colton. He was so young. A lot of people say, oh, I'm sure you brought it up, but we never had. How do you talk to a little one about miscarriage so they can understand it? We didn't. And so when he comes in the room and tells his mom, I have 2 sisters, we had no clue where he was going. Well, you're talking about your cousin, your friend? He goes, no, Mom, you had a baby die in your tummy, didn't you? You talk about time stopping. I mean, I'm sitting over on the other side of the room, but I'm listening, and it's like, wow. And her first response just goes to show, she looks at him, who told you? I mean, that was a hurt. That was a quiet hurt. And he's like, well, she did. She told me. He turns around to walk away. Mom explodes. I mean, you don't tell me something like that and walk away. And I remember him looking at me like, Dad, help. And I'm like.
So her response was anger.
Oh, it hurt. Yeah. I mean, you think there's some hurts inside you've dealt with, you've moved on, but you haven't. Yeah. And we found that out that day. We hadn't dealt with that hurt. We had tried to bury it. We had tried to think about something else, but it was still in there.
I would have thought she'd be thrilled to hear this.
Well, the fact that she'd lost a baby is what, that's what hurt. Yeah. Then he starts to describe her. Well, she looks like you, and she can't wait for you and Dad to get to heaven. And I remember him looking up to me and saying, Dad, I told her you give her a hug when you get to heaven. You always give your kids hugs. And we tried to ask him for her name. What's her name? Well, Dad, you never gave her a name. all of a sudden that pain was replaced by a peace. It was so incredible because we went from excruciating pain, kind of like the doctor pointing to the hurt, to a healing that happened so quick. That was a big reason why God told me we had to write the book. When I was wrestling with God, I put my son out there.
Yeah.
He's like, well, Todd, do you remember the peace you experienced when you found out about your daughter? I'm like, oh yeah, God, I'll never forget that. And he's like, is it right for you to keep that to yourself? That change from pain to peace was huge.
So the Lord would be thinking about all those millions of women who've had miscarriages. And,
how about the dads? You know how dads write us?
Oh, and dads too.
Yeah,
sure,
incredible.
The book's called Heaven is for Real, Little Boy's astounding story of his trip to heaven and back. And we're making this book available to you for your best ministry gift. Here's how you can get it.
Heaven is for Real is the true story of the 4-year-old son of a small-town Nebraska pastor who during emergency surgery slips from consciousness and enters heaven. He survives, and young Colton begins to share how he met his miscarried sister, whom no one had told him about.
And she comes up and gives me a big hug and tells me she's my sister, and then she explains what happened.
Colton continued to describe the horse that only Jesus could ride and how the Holy Spirit sends power from heaven to help us. Heaven is for Real is told by the father, Todd Burpo, but often in Colton's own words. The message is simple: heaven is a real place. Jesus really loves children, and be ready, there is a coming last battle. This book is our thanks to you for your support. To request a copy, write to us in Canada or in the United States. Visit crossroads.ca or simply call 1-800-265-3100.